Hello and welcome to IMHO. Today I'm speaking to Stephen Kenwright about brand bias for visibility in search and LLMs. Stephen is best known as the founder of Rise at 7, and currently he's a non-executive director and consultant. I saw Stephen speak recently at a small event for Systrix in Leeds, and he spoke about strategies for exploiting Google's brand bias, and I wanted to dive a little bit more into that talk. So, Stephen, could you give me a summary about the brand search visibility and how it correlates?
I can. I think this has been a thing for a really long time. As I was writing about this in 2016 for Branded 3, I think actually it was already a thing long before that. And we were fortunate working with some fairly well-known brands who were doing brand building activity. A lot of it's TV, but some of it's, radio and all sorts of other things as well. So we'd always been able to spot some kind of correlation. And I think if you go back a little further, talking about the SEO industry and its perception of what Google wants. The brand bias term has been there for well over a decade and a half, really. The idea that Google wants to rank brands ahead of non-brands, because of course it does. Like Google wants to give a good experience to its searchers, and a good way to do that is to make sure that the results that it's showing are the results that the users are expecting to see. It's not all discovery, it's reconnecting people with those mental connections they've already got about companies that they've already heard of.
How do you think that, I mean, obviously you spoke at Leeds more specifically about brand bias in search and Google, but how do you think that this is going to now translate? How can we effectively leverage it for AI platforms?
I think with AI, we are in an interesting place because I think we've got an opportunity to learn a lot of lessons from what we've done wrong previously. And for the most part, currently at least, what's happening within the LLMs and optimization for the LLMs is kind of stuff we're already doing or stuff that we can easily modify. If we think about what we should be doing moving forwards, it should be moving away from our quote unquote SEO tactics into using the tactics properly in the way that they were intended in terms of PR, in terms of brand building, and in terms of, product management for websites, right? It's almost as if the anything that's for SEO or for Google is probably by default a thing you shouldn't be doing now, and very much a for the audience and for the customer, you generally win out. And I think, although that's already true in LLMs, I think that's going to be more and more true as they progress.
I mean, do you think, because obviously there's a massive instability now, do you think that really putting brand front and center is the best way to navigate this current instability?
I think if you approach this question as an SEO, the first thing I would say is we're the only ones who aren't. In the entire marketing mix, every other discipline, from PR to the marketing manager through to the social media team, literally everyone else, including the C-suite, is interested in brand in some capacity. And historically, SEOs have been the exception to that because as brand hasn't been listed as a ranking factor specifically, it's not been something that we've been particularly focused on. I think the first thing that I would say is just by switching that mindset and talking about what the impact on brand our SEO activities would actually have might be, we actually get a lot more done. Like marketing budgets are easier to come by, and people are much more willing to get behind the initiatives we've got because it's no longer this black box opaque thing that we're trying to influence and rank because it doesn't matter that users never see this thing. Uh, if we decide actually what we're trying to do is, yes, get in front of users and make sure users do see this thing, that's actually the most important thing of every aspect of what we do, everything becomes a little bit easier. So just in a practicality sense right now, I think that's an obvious thing.
Just looking at something else from your talk in Leeds, one of the things that I found really, really interesting was how you talked about, you referenced TV adverts and their direct influence on search behavior. You also referenced some research from, is it Les Binet? Have I said that completely wrong?
I'm sure he gets
Um,
it all the time.
yeah, about how the trade-off between brand and activation affects across different channels. Found this really interesting. Do you think that this can actually translate this sort of brand ranking visibility correlation? Do you think that can particularly with TV, do you think investment specifically, say, into TV adverts or maybe print adverts, or like offline activity, do you think that can have influence on LLMs?
Yes, I think it can, but I don't think it's direct. It's one of those many, many indirect, we'll call them ranking factors, but it's not like Google or an LLM knows that you're on TV. I think maybe they do. Maybe they can ingest TV ad schedules. Who knows? But I don't think that that matters either way. What matters is the behavior that it inspires in the customer base. And if you're on TV, what happens is people search for you more frequently than they would have done otherwise regardless of whether they've searched for you specifically, if they've searched for a generic term, a head term, a big commercial keyword, they're more likely to click on you by a factor of about a third. And this is according to research from ITV. And, they would know, they do a lot of advertising. But also, those people convert better as well. So, what Google ultimately has been rewarding for a really long time, I think back to probably the in my career, the most important piece of SEO content, the most important article written for me, it wasn't written for me, but for me, it was the most important, was by AJ Cohn, a blind 5-year-old. And he wrote a piece talking about time to long click being the metric. And this is long before we knew for a fact that it was. And AJ definitely a trailblazer for sure. But he talked about what Google's trying to do, ironically, is keep people away from Google. Google wants someone to search for something many times because they can show ads and then click on a thing and then not come back because that's a really good indication that that was a good result for that particular query. And when I read that piece of content, I'm going to say that was 2012. It might have been a little bit later than that. I started to look for that happening all over the place. And there's so many factors in UX, in CX, in all sorts of different CRO disciplines that make a difference to that. But one of the biggest things that makes a difference is having the trust from the user because you're a brand, and having the trust from the user comes from brand building activity. It doesn't come from having an exact match domain that happens to rank first for a keyword because it's an exact match keyword. That must be a good result, right? That's just not how the real world works. So it's I'd say it's indirect in the sense of Google isn't literally looking at this, processing it, and factoring a score as associated with it, which is what we SEOs tend to think of when we're thinking about how Google works. If we buy into the fact, as various leaked papers and confirmations and all sorts of things have now proved is the case, that Google is taking user data and deciding what's a good result based on that user data, then we should be thinking about how do we influence user behavior. And TV, brand building, print ads, like you said, but ads in all sorts of different places on the tube, right? All these kind of places are going to make a much bigger impact than a single link does.
I think what's most interesting and exciting is I feel that we now have this shift towards classic marketing and actually having to really think about brand marketing. And I think that's only going to be beneficial for the industry as a whole. And I know we're going through some difficulty right now, but I think we will see much more interesting campaigns. We'll see better work from brands. You spoke at the Hive event in Manchester recently. And I quote, you said, you should be making a conscious decision about which search engines to optimize for. Now, we've obviously just had the launch of Comet, and there's rumors this week of a new browser by OpenAI, which has massive potential to completely change the search experience. Do you think that Google's position in this new search ecosystem that we're now looking at, do you think it's seriously under threat? Or do you think it will manage to remain a significant part of a fractured search journey?
I think it's going to be a significant part still, but I think you have to look at how the data has been presented over the last few years. Any market share table saying these are the biggest search engines, you'll see Google still an eight beginning digit, massive, massive market share compared to everyone else. You might notice in the UK, Bing is 49% of UK adults using Bing on a monthly basis. If we look outside of that, 10 blue link search engines and say, where are people doing their searching now? We would have noticed 5 years ago that people were using other things. People were using, I mean, Instagram even, but certainly nowadays more frequently, Pinterest would be a big big contributor there. Reddit, again, half of the UK adult population use Reddit, not to mention the non-adult population using Reddit that will become the adult population in the next few years. Quarter of UK adults use Quora, right? People are going to find answers in different places. And even in Google's own mix, nearly everyone uses YouTube. And not only does nearly everyone use YouTube, they spend longer on YouTube by a factor of multiple numbers compared to Google. So if we had been paying attention for a little while about where Google's place is in this ecosystem, it's been under threat from all sorts of broad search engines in the social sense, particularly. But more than that, there's a lot of niche search engines that have become big businesses, right? So I would reference Auto Trader, for example, as it's a search engine. It's you find used cars on this search engine, and it replaced Google, right? No, not no, but most people will appear in Auto Trader at some point in that journey, and more frequently, even a decade ago, people would start there. Amazon was the big threat to Google, according to Eric Schmidt and Google itself. And for some reason, we sort of stopped talking about that at some point before Amazon actually really overtook Google in that sense in e-commerce search. So it's always happened. It's been happening for a very long time. And Google's market share, if you were to look at, and we talk about the dream being end-to-end attribution. If there was such a thing in search journeys, we would see that Google is no longer the dominant player half a decade ago.
So, in your opinion, you're still going to be back in Google. You still think it's going to be a significant search engine to be optimizing for?
I don't see it going anywhere. And I also don't see the massive difference in LLM optimization. So most of the things that you would be doing for Google now, and I say that with a little bit of trepidation for Google, but most of the things that work in Google now are broadly marketing things anyway, and broadly impact LLM optimization and also Bing and also lots of these other things too. So I don't think we are yet at a place where, and I do think we should be making a conscious decision about which search engines to use because let's face it, Reddit's not for everyone. There are certain brands it works for and certain brands it doesn't. Pinterest would be 4 out of 5 Pinterest users are female. So if you are a brand that has no female audience, then clearly you're not going to do that. So that's what I mean about making a conscious decision. I feel like Google's going to be one of those things for half a decade still to come. And, we definitely shouldn't be putting all our eggs in a basket that's going to be 5 years from happening.
If you had to start again from the beginning, or you had to create a campaign for a brand new brand to really quickly gain traction, what would you do?
Do I have a budget?
Yes, you can have a budget, but I think the sort of the point of the question is, what would you do and on what channel?
Well, I would be thinking about the long and the short of it. I would be thinking about driving some behavior and finding some action at the end of that. So right now, I would have a website. I would probably, let's assume it's an e-commerce brand. So I've got an e-commerce website and you can transact on that website. And then if I was going to massively oversimplify this, I would spend millions of pounds on television advertising. And if I was going to do nothing else at all, I'd have a website and spend a lot of money on TV. And if I was going to do a lot more stuff, I'd do PR too. But, you know, we're trying to keep it simple, right?
Wow, yeah, that's fascinating. That's really interesting. That we're going back. It's almost like we're reversing back to time before what was called new media in the early 90s to back to TV
Before we ruined the internet, yeah.
before we were in the internet. Yeah. Well, obviously, going to wrap up there, Stephen. This being a short format show and everything, it's been brilliant speaking to you. And just before we go, please tell me, I do believe that you currently have a newsletter. Is it, I believe, stephenkenwright.com, which is anything agency growth, and it's a weekly newsletter?
That's right. It's .co.uk, but it redirects because SEO and everything. So you get to it from .com. Anyway, I talk about new business, talk about marketing, talk about operations, anything to do with growing a marketing agency.
Fantastic. Well, it's been great to speak to you, Stephen, and thank you for your time.
Likewise, Shelley, good to catch up.